You deserve that. I can still hear their words, a sound that doesn't go away. Zenobia Washington is my name. My age is 59, and for months, until the stillness itself grew intolerable, I kept this story locked up in silence. Serafina, my son Orion's new mother-in-law, flung a bowl of steaming hot gumbo in my face that evening at his wedding reception. I could feel the thick broth trickling down my ivory silk top, the searing heat piercing my skin, and the spices stinging my eyes. The smile, however, was more painful than the soup. She narrowed her eyes and smiled calmly, almost contentedly, as though she had finally done something she had been wanting to do for years. That is what you deserve, she said again, raising her chin and speaking firmly. There was silence in the banquet hall. Each diner glanced at their plates. Nobody made a move. My kid Orion was the only one who spoke, my only child, the boy I raised alone when his father abandoned us. I sacrificed everything I had to this man. I felt the floor give apart under my feet as he sat with his arms crossed at the head table and muttered, "She's right, Mama." I refrained from screaming. I didn't weep. I did not inquire as to why. I just picked up the linen napkin from my lap, using all the remaining dignity to wipe my burning face, and silently got up from my chair. Despite the fact that I was trembling inside, I headed right for the double doors. However, I did something unexpected before I left that building. I removed my cell phone from my clutch, called a number I had saved weeks earlier, and uttered simply 3 words, "It's time." Then I hung up. I closed the door softly behind me. I was not followed. No one asked anything. One question raced through my mind as I climbed into my car, turned on the ignition, and drove back toward my peaceful West End condo through the dim streets of Buckhead. How did I arrive here? Because I used to think that a son's love lasted forever, and Orion would hold me and tell me, "You're my hero, Mama." I used to trust, but that night, when my face burned and my heart broke, I realized something I never would have imagined. The folks who betray us the most are sometimes the ones we love the most, and sometimes our only remaining weapon is quiet. They will never forget what transpired following that phone call. But I have to tell you how it all began in order for you to understand why I did what I did. How a mother who given her everything was humiliated in front of strangers in a room, and how I found too late that my son was concealing a secret that would change everything. Sometimes we place too much trust in the wrong individuals. Have you ever been disappointed by someone you loved? Tell me your story in the comments. I'd like to read it. 3 years ago, my life was different. Not perfect, but mine. In the West End of Atlanta. I lived in a large apartment with a balcony filled with bougainvillea and scarlet geraniums, which I watered every morning. I had a routine. At 7, I would have a strong cup of coffee, get some sweet potato pastries from Mr. Henderson's bakery on the corner, and then set up my little, upscale tailoring business on the ground level. I didn't have to be wealthy, but I wasn't either. I discovered something that many women take decades to comprehend after. Orion's father abandoned us while my son was only 5 years old, that one can sustain an entire life with her own 2 hands without asking anyone for permission. I stitched bridal gowns, prom dresses, and embroidered blouses for church ladies who wanted to look exquisite without shouting about their money. My hands were familiar with every stitch, hem, and secret that a patiently handled fabric holds. Orion grew up seeing that. He observed me get up at 5 in the morning to fulfill an order. He watched me stitch till my fingers were bleeding. He witnessed me cry from tiredness over the singing machine that had belonged to my grandmother, and then dry my eyes and keep on. "Mama, when I grow up, I'm going to work hard so you can rest," he would tell me with his wide, serious eyes while I served him breakfast before school. And I believed him because Orion was always a good youngster, responsible, affectionate. He earned good grades and studied without my asking. He assisted me in cleaning the store on Sundays and asked me questions about colors, fabrics, and how I knew which clothing each customer wanted. "Baby," I would tell him, since I paid attention to them. He would nod carefully before heading out to play basketball with the youngsters in the neighborhood. People always tell you what they need, even if they don't use words. I thought all of the sacrifices had been worthwhile. When he turned 18 and enrolled in Morehouse College to study business administration, my son was going to have what I never had: a career, a degree, a future without back pain or numb fingers. I put in double and triple shifts. I created dresses for weddings of families that would never welcome me to their tables, but who paid well. I wanted Orion to graduate from college debt-free, so I saved every penny and refused to accept any loans or assistance. And he did. After graduating with honors, he was hired by a prestigious real estate company. He began making good money, wearing clothes that I made for him. And every Sunday when he came for lunch, he would bring me flowers. He would kiss my forehead and say, "Thank you, Mama. You are the reason I am everything I am." And until he met Clementina, I felt whole. The first time Orion talked to me about her, I heard something unusual in his voice. A new feeling, a glitter in his eyes I had never seen. "She's special, Mother. Very unique." Clementina was the lone child of a Buckhead family with a lot of money. Her father operated a series of hardware supply stores. Serafina, her mother, was capable of giving commands like a general, despite never having worked a day in her life. I put on my prettiest dress, the navy blue one with the embroidered collar. I had sewn for a distant cousin's wedding when Orion said he wanted to introduce me to her. I put on my mother's pearl earrings and straightened my hair. I wanted to make a good impression. The meeting was at a restaurant in Buckhead that I would never have chosen. Too fancy, too costly. Clementina showed in wearing a flawless white dress and a smile that stopped short of her eyes. But Orion said, "I want you to get to know each other well. Mama Clementina is important to me." She was lovely, courteous, but frigid. We discussed irrelevant topics. Even though she and Orion had only been dating for 6 months, she was already seeing the wedding, the weather, and her work in interior design. I nodded, grinned, and asked the appropriate questions. But something in my gut twisted as she replied, "My mother is anxious to meet you, Miss Zenobia. I've told her so much about you." The way she spoke, Miss Zenobia, sounded weird, as if my name needed a title to exist in her world. I wanted to believe Orion when he held my hand and squeezed mine, saying, "Everything is going to be fine, Mama." At the time, I still thought that a son's love was greater than anything else. I still believed that what we had built together, just the two of us, for so many years, was unbreakable. I had no idea that some women see other women as adversaries right away. And I didn't know yet that Serafina had already decided, long before meeting me, that I wasn't enough for her family. When we got out of the restaurant that day, Orion gave me a big embrace and told me in the car, "Clementina adored you, Mama." I grinned, but something I didn't want to hear was uttered by a little, icy voice. "Both Serafina and that girl are lying. They asked me to join them for supper 3 months later." Everything began to fall apart at that point. Serafina's mansion in Buckhead was precisely how I anticipated: huge, chilly, and crammed with unnecessary items. Crystal chandeliers, Persian rugs, oil paintings, and gold frames, furnishings that appeared to have been taken from a home decor magazine. It was so flawless that the very sight of it was frightening. Serafina greeted Orion and me at the door that evening with a smile that stopped short of her eyes. After saying, "Zenobia, how nice to see you," she kissed me twice without actually touching my cheek. Come in, make yourself at home." But I didn't feel at home. I felt like an intruder. Clementina emerged down the staircase, looking stunning in a pale pink dress that most likely cost more than 3 months' worth of my rent. As usual, she welcomed me with a courteous but hollow grin. "Miss Zenobia, you look very good." Once more, that Miss Zenobia, as though my name merely had that prefix, which made me feel ancient and alien. Reginald, the big raspy-voiced husband of Serafina, hardly shook my hand before he went back to his seat in front of the TV. He sipped scotch and said very little throughout the evening, only grunting now and then. Orion appeared content and at ease, as though the mansion belonged to him more than the tiny flat where he had been raised. I was more hurt by that than I cared to acknowledge. A young housekeeper, eyes downcast, entered and exited the kitchen silently while serving dinner. When she asked for "Bring the bread and more water." When the girl served me, I made an effort to smile. She glanced at me, almost appreciatively, and then vanished once again. The dinner talk was strained from the beginning. Serafina talked about her pals at the country club, their planned Hilton Head vacation, and the new SUV that Reginald had purchased. "Zenobia, you do realize that you can't just drive about in anything." She chuckled lightly as she spoke. "A particular level must be maintained." Unsure of what to say, I nodded. Clementina stepped forward and made a possessive touch on Orion's arm. "I've already informed Orion, Mama, that he needs to consider getting a larger automobile once we are married. He drives a very small automobile." Orion chuckled uneasily. "Babe, the car is all right. It works nicely for me. However, aren't we going to have kids?" Clementina's voice was sweet as she demanded. "We require safety and space. In addition, my dad can assist you with the down payment. A knot formed in my stomach. That automobile was purchased by my son, using his own funds. I had seen him put in a lot of effort to earn it, and now this chick was discussing it as though it were embarrassing. I spoke calmly but firmly. I believe Orion knows what's best for him. For the first time all night, Serafina looked at me. Zenobia, of course, Orion is a bright young man. He will therefore undoubtedly make the best choices for his future because of this. For his new household. It felt like a quiet smack when she mentioned his new family, as though I had lost my place in that future. I realized something awful at that very moment, when Orion remained silent and continued to eat with his head down. They were pushing me away with my son's help. Serafina continued to speak. Let's talk about the wedding now. I've already started looking at churches with Clementine. Naturally, the cathedral will host the wedding. My parents, grandparents, the entire family, and the reception at the St. Regis all got married there. Elegant but not overly showy, since everything needs to be done correctly, right? I felt my throat tighten as I nodded. I had received no questions. I had been left out of these preparations. It was as though I had no right to be at my son's wedding. And what do you think, Zenobia? Serafina inquired abruptly, wearing her phony smile. Is the concept appealing to you? I forced a smile and said, it sounds beautiful. The happiness of Orion and Clementina is what matters. She raised her wine glass and said, exactly. What matters is that they are content and get off to a good, burden-free start. Free of burdens, like poison. The phrase hung in the air. Clementina rose and went to the restroom. Reginald fell asleep in his armchair, and Serafina chose that chance to lean toward me, her words low but clear. Zenobia, you seem like a reasonable woman, so I'm going to be direct with you. Orion is a good boy, but he's accustomed to a certain life, a simple life, and that's okay. However, he will now be a member of our family. Our family also has expectations. Expectations, I said again, as the temperature rose in my neck. Expectations, indeed. Orion needs to put his future ahead of his past, while Clementina needs stability and a supportive husband. Her gaze pierced me. The past, I whispered. Don't misinterpret me. You've done a lot for your son, I know that. That is commendable. But it's time for him to take off on his own, free from emotional reliance and strings. It was as though she had pierced my chest with a knife. I answered, I have never been a burden to my son, in a weak but resolute voice. Of course not, she grinned and answered. I was unable to reply since Clementina had just come back from the restroom. But now Orion has other priorities, and I am sure that you, as a good mother, will know how to step aside when necessary. As though nothing had happened and the housekeeper had delivered dessert, Orion's smile returned. Brûlée cream. Not a bite was tasted by me. Serafina handed me a little box after dinner. Zenobia, a small detail. You consider us, then. There was a white teacup with gold rims made of exquisite china inside, stylish, costly, and icy. I said, thank you, without making eye contact with her. Orion was silent in the car all the way back to my place. I was, too. He finally broke the silence when we pulled up in front of my building. I asked him, looking into his eyes for the youngster he once was, did you like Serafina, Mama? The youngster who called me his idol and gave me a hug. However, that boy had vanished. With deliberate word choice, I remarked, she seems like a strong woman. Yes, he grinned in response. She is amazing. She has a tight relationship with Clementine. That's good to see. And us. I wanted to yell. We are no longer close. However, I remained silent. I simply strolled up the stairs to my empty apartment after getting out of the car and kissing him goodbye. I held the cup Serafina had given me that night while I prepared coffee in my old kettle and gazed out the window at the city lights. It was flawless and lovely. However, since that cup wasn't a present, I was unable to drink the coffee I had just poured. When I raised it to my lips, there was a message. You are not a part of our world. Untouching it, I returned to picking up my old stoneware mug, which I had been using every morning for years. I owned that one. That person was aware of my life's flavor. And like a black weed, a question started to grow inside of me as I sipped my coffee in solitude. To what far would she go to remove me from my son's life? I will soon find out, even though I didn't know yet. I wonder where you are listening from as I tell you all of this. In the comments, write the name of your city. The months that followed felt like stepping on shattered glass barefoot. Every step ached, but I smiled and kept going, telling myself that it was normal, that everything would be fine, that this is how it is when a son gets married, and that I needed to learn to let go. In actuality though, They were preventing me from moving on. I was being torn away by them. Orion had begun to visit less frequently. He was always there on Sundays. He would bring pastries. He would assist me in moving furniture so I could clean. He would remain to dine and share his week with me. However, the visits became bi-weekly, then monthly, then intermittent, all with the same justification. Following that dinner at Serafina's place, "I'm sorry, Mom. I had plans with Clementina's family." "I'm sorry, Mom. We were invited to the club for lunch by "I'm sorry, Mom. We need to check on the wedding." Clementina at all times. Serafina always. They're always there. It was okay, I said, because even though I knew he was occupied, something inside of me was slowly dying. Orion contacted me one afternoon to let me know that Clementina wanted me to accompany them to pick out the wedding gown. With my heart pounding in my chest, I said, "Really?" "Yes," Mama pressed Clementina. "She says, you're an expert in fabrics and wants your opinion." For the first time in weeks, I felt hope. Maybe I had been wrong about Clementina. Maybe she did want to include me. Maybe it was all a matter of giving it time. On the day of the appointment, I arrived half an hour early at the boutique, an elegant shop in Buckhead, with dresses that cost what I earned in 6 months. Clementina arrived late, accompanied by Serafina and 3 friends who wouldn't stop laughing and taking photos with their phones. "Miss Zenobia," Clementina said, kissing my cheek, "I'm so glad you came. We need your expert eye." I sat on a velvet sofa while she tried on dress after dress, all beautiful, all expensive, all looking the same to my eyes. The friends applauded. Serafina gave orders to the shop assistant, and I sat there quiet without anyone asking me anything, until Clementina came out in a French lace dress, strapless with an endless train. "What do you think, Miss Zenobia?" she asked, twirling in front of the mirror. All eyes turned to me. I took a deep breath and told the truth. "It is beautiful, but I think the strapless cut doesn't flatter you as much. You have delicate shoulders. A dress with lace sleeves or thin straps would highlight your figure better." The silence was immediate. The friends stopped smiling. Serafina looked at me with cold eyes, and Clementina let out a nervous laugh. "Oh well, it's just that this type of dress is what's in fashion. Miss Zenobia, I don't know if you are very up to date with trends." Her friends laughed quietly, but loud enough for me to hear. Serafina stood up and put a hand on Clementina's shoulder. "My baby, you look spectacular in everything. Don't worry, this dress is perfect. We're taking it." Clementina smiled, relieved. "Yes, Mama, you're right." Mama Clementina had called Serafina Mama, and she still called me Mrs. Zenobia. I stayed seated on that invisible velvet sofa while they kept talking about veils, headpieces, and designer shoes. No one asked me anything again. When we left the boutique, Orion was waiting for us outside. Clementina ran to him and showed him photos of the dress. "Isn't it true? I'm going to look precious, love. You're going to be the most beautiful bride in the world," he said, kissing her. Feeling like a shadow, I hung back and gripped my purse. "How did it go, Mama? Did you like the dress?" Orion asked when he finally noticed me. "It's lovely." I forced a grin. "Thank you for coming. I know this is important to Clementina, and to you." I wanted to yell. I simply nodded when she said, "It's not important to you that I'm here." Serafina came over, took Orion by the arm, and whispered softly, "Orion, will you join us for lunch?" "Of course. We need to discuss the last aspects of the wedding. Of course, Serafina Mama is coming too, right?" Clementina asked, looking at me with that polite, empty smile. Before I could answer, Serafina said, "Oh no, my dear. Zenobia must be exhausted. In addition, we will discuss highly specific organizational topics. We don't want to boring her." Orion remained silent. He didn't say anything, didn't insist, and didn't protect me. "We're going with my mom." He simply kissed them on the cheek and departed with them. I saw them leave while I stood on the sidewalk, and I started crying in front of people for the first time. I only shed a few tears quickly, and wiped them away with the back of my hand before anyone noticed. I returned to my apartment by bus. I didn't want to pay for an Uber ride. I brewed coffee in my stoneware mug, the one that always recognized my life's taste as soon as I arrived home. The china cup that Serafina had given me remained unopened and collecting dust on the table. Something inside of me whispered to me after I stared at it for a while, "This isn't going to get better. It's only going to get worse." I didn't want to listen though, because I still thought a son's love was more powerful than any outside force. I continued to think that Orion would awaken and understand that he would return to the youngster who had embraced me. and referred to me as his hero. So I continued. When they left me out, I continued to smile. Despite everything was wrong, I kept saying, "It's okay," in order to avoid becoming an issue, a burden, or the fulfillment of the prophecy Serafina had put in my son's mind. I continued to swallow the anguish. "If you don't get away from your mother, she will suffocate you." Orion asked me to supper 2 weeks later, like before, just the two of us. I was ecstatic. I got to the restaurant 30 minutes early. I had taken care in my attire. I wore a burgundy dress that I had sewed myself, and the collar had subtle embroidery. I wanted to make my son proud. He wasn't alone though, when he got there. He had Clementina with him. "I'm sorry, Mom, Clementina desired our company. I hope it's okay with you." "Not, of course," I said, a falsehood. Clementina spoke endlessly about the wedding, their planned Bora Bora honeymoon, and the apartment her father would give them as a wedding present over supper. "Miss Zenobia, it's in Buckhead. There are 2 complete bathrooms, 3 bedrooms, and a patio with a breathtaking view. My father feels it's critical to get off to a good start." Orion appeared content. I simply grinned. Orion pulled out his wallet and uttered something that broke my heart when the check arrived. "Can you lend me $2,000, Mama? I'm a touch tight because I spent a lot of money this month on wedding-related expenses." $2,000. I had no additional $2,000. I gave him the money I had set aside for emergencies and the power bill, even though I hardly had enough to cover my rent and the shop's expenditures. "Son, of course, do not be concerned. Mama, thank you. Next month I'll reimburse you." I never asked him for it, and he never reimbursed me because I realized something awful at that very time. His mother was no longer me. I was his backup plan, his bank, and his safety net. However, I was no longer the most significant individual in his life. When I got back to my flat that evening, I sat with my coffee in front of the window and gazed at the city lights, wondering how I got there. What could make a woman feel so invisible after giving everything she had, her youth, her health, her entire life, for a son? However, I was still unaware of the reality. I was still unaware that all that had transpired thus far was only the beginning, that my only child, my son Orion, was already a part of Serafina's plan. I continued to act as though nothing was wrong as the wedding drew near like an impending storm. Orion didn't call me for weeks. When he did, the talks were short, sidetracked, and characterized by awkward silences. "Mama, how are you?" "All right, son. How about you?" "All right, all right." "You think they're busy getting ready?" "Well, I have to leave. I have a call from Clementina." Click, and I was left holding the phone while experiencing a slight emptiness inside of me. However, the short calls weren't the worst. The invitations that never showed up were the worst. By coincidence, I learned that Clementina's family friends were attending a cookout at Reginald's house with a live band for Orion's bachelor party. Nobody informed me. Additionally, the godparents and close relatives attended a rehearsal dinner at a very pricey Italian restaurant. I was not invited. Orion became uneasy when I questioned him about why I hadn't been invited. "Oh, Mama, they were minor items. We didn't want to trouble you at the last minute, annoy you." As though I were an annoyance. As though I were an issue that should be avoided. But until one afternoon, everything changed. I continued to smile, to remain silent, and to say, "Don't worry, son, I understand." It was a Tuesday. Tuesdays have always been slow days at the shop, which is why I remember. The doorbell rang as I was wrapping up the hemming of a gala dress. A young delivery man wearing a blue cap and holding a manila envelope was waiting for me when I opened the door. "Washington Zenobia, that's me, indeed. Please sign here." I signed without giving it any thought. After giving me the envelope, the boy walked away. After shutting the door, I examined the gift. My name was penned in black ink, and there was no return address. My gut twisted in some way. With shaking hands, I opened the envelope while seated in the shop chair. There were pictures within, lots of pictures. I was initially perplexed by what I was witnessing. They were pictures of my kid Orion in various settings: a hotel entrance, a parking lot, and restaurant. But he wasn't alone. He had a woman with him. Furthermore, Clementina was not that woman. Serafina was the one. I could feel my feet moving on the floor. Orion and Serafina were seen exiting a restaurant in the first picture. He had his hand on the small of her back. Her head was flung back as she laughed. The second picture was taken in a parking lot. She was waiting for Orion to open the automobile door. They were too near to one another. The third picture made me gasp for air. Serafina and Orion were entering the St. Regis Hotel together at the entryway. His hand was encircling her waist, She had a smile on her face that I had never seen before as she gazed at him. A private grin, a lady who is familiar with a man's body would smile. I let the pictures fall to the ground. My hands were shaking so much I couldn't hold them. I thought my heart may burst from the force of its thumping. No, this isn't possible. I scooped up the images with fumbling fingers. I kept examining them in an attempt to find a rational explanation. It might have been a business lunch. Perhaps Serafina was in need of assistance. Perhaps. However, there were more pictures. Too close to Serafina's lips, Orion planted a kiss on her cheek. Serafina placed her hands on Orion's chest and adjusted his tie. They both entered a dress I didn't recognize, and an apartment. And the final picture, the one that caused me to groan without realizing it, Serafina and Orion at night on a balcony. He was giving her a back hug. Like two lovers who have shared something forbidden, she was leaning across his chest with her eyes closed. I staggered out of the chair, hurried to the bathroom, and puked. Everything I had inside was thrown up, leaving just a bitter taste in my mouth and dry heaves. I remained there, sobbing hysterically, while kneeling in front of the toilet. My only son, my son. I reared the boy by myself. I devoted everything to that boy, the youngster who referred to me as his hero. He was having an affair with the mother of his fiancée, with a woman who is 20 years his senior, with a woman who had repeatedly degraded me. All of a sudden, everything made sense. Serafina detested me because of this. She had wanted me out of Orion's life from the start for that reason. It had nothing to do with my poverty, simplicity, or foreign origins. The reason for this was that I was her competitor, the real mother, the one who had previously known Orion, and the one who could see what she had made of him. And Orion had left me for that reason, not for Serafina or Clementina, the lady who had wooed him, played with him, and made him her plaything. I sobbed, trembled, and felt everything I believed to be true about my life fall apart while I lay on the bathroom floor for an indeterminate amount of time. I cleaned my face with cold water after I eventually got up and went back to the business. The pictures remained strewn all over the chair. My hands were no longer shaking as I picked them up one by one because the shock was giving way to something else, something hard, something cold. I sat in front of my sewing machine and stared at the black thread hanging from the needle. While I replaced the pictures in the envelope, I remembered all the times Serafina had made me feel ashamed. I considered all the instances in which Orion had disregarded me. I thought about Clementina, the unfortunate girl who was unaware that her fiancé was having an affair with her own mother, and the impending wedding. And I reflected on myself, the mother who had worked herself to the bone to provide a better life for her son, the woman who had silently accepted taunts and contempt, the woman who had imagined a son's love would last forever. The woman had passed away, and someone new, who was no longer going to be silent, took her place. After a client informed me about a private investigator who had assisted her in uncovering her husband's adultery, I took my phone and contacted a number I had stored months earlier. Greetings for the afternoon. Zenobia Washington is this person. I require your assistance. The other voice was impartial and professional. Miss Washington, tell me how I can assist you. I need more details, more evidence, everything you can obtain for two people, including dates and locations. Serafina Vance and Orion Washington are their names. A pause occurred. Are they related in any way? Yes, I responded, my voice no longer shaking. She is the mother of his fiancé, and he is my son. One more extended pause. I get it. And, Miss Washington, how are you going to use the information? I peered through the storefront window. The lights of the city were coming on. The sky had been colored violet and orange. I answered, I don't know yet, but I want to be ready when I find out. I'll send you my quote via email. Miss Washington, too. Indeed, certain facts are more painful than lies. Do you want to know for sure? I shut my eyes. I thought of my son, the young man he had grown into. Additionally, I said something I never would have imagined saying. What hurts no longer matters. I must know the truth. After hanging up, I brewed a cup of coffee in my stoneware mug and bided my time, because I now understood that this story would continue beyond the wedding. It was only the start, and I refused to remain the silent sufferer any longer. I was going to be the lady who waited, who knew, who would make a single phone call at the right time and cause everything to fall apart. Did you hold a painful secret as well? Have you learned something that has altered your entire perspective? Tell me in the comments. Booker Hughes was the name of the private investigator. He was a normal-looking man in his 50s, with glasses and a confident, quiet voice. far from any place where people would identify me. We met in a quiet coffee shop in Dakar. He handed me a heavy manila folder with reports, photos, and paperwork. Calmly, Miss Washington, he remarked, I already knew what I was going to see, so I put my hands on the table and said, I found what you asked for. But before I show you, I need you to take a deep breath. He looked me in the eyes and said, No, you have no idea. I assure you. My world fell apart when he opened the folder. The initial pictures resembled the ones I had found in the anonymous package. Serafina and Orion were seen in hotels, restaurants, and a midtown apartment that the investigator claimed she had rented especially for their meetings. A shell company is leasing this apartment, Booker clarified. However, I tracked down the payments. Serafina Vance's personal account is the source of all of them. I forced myself to continue searching despite feeling queasy once more. Security cameras saw both of them arriving together. Despite hotel records showing rooms reserved in her name at the St. Regis, the Four Seasons, and the Ritz-Carlton. When did it start? With a voice I hardly recognized as mine, I asked. Booker pointed to a date after turning a few pages. I discovered the first record from a year and a half ago. 1.5 years. For a year and a half, my son had been having an affair with the mother of his fiancée. Since prior to his engagement to Clement, ever since I first encountered that family, Booker said gravely, there's more. He presented me with bank statements that showed significant sums, 10,000 here, 20,000 there, and 50,000 once, as well as transfers from Serafina's account to Orion's. What is this? I muttered. Payments, said Booker. She often gives money to your son, like poison. The phrase hung in the air. Payments. It wasn't only an affair between my son and that woman. He was allowing her to hold on to him. What else is there? Yes, Booker went on. And this is the most sensitive area. He pulled out more papers. I looked into Serafina's spouse, Mr. Reginald Vance, and his financial situation. He has gone bankrupt. It appears that the hardware chain that has been so successful is about to fail. The Buckhead house has 3 mortgages, and he owes money to multiple banks. Sitting quietly, I thought, so, it's all a lie. The wealth, the money, the status, it's a facade, Booker said in response to my question. It's a very well-constructed facade, but it's crumbling apart, and I think Serafina knows that, which is why she's using her daughter. Using Clementina how? Booker took out more papers. Clementina inherited a considerable fortune from her maternal grandmother 2 years ago, close to 4 or 5 million in property and bank accounts. But that money is in a trust that can only be touched under certain conditions. What conditions? That Clementina gets married. Once married, she has full access to that inheritance, and if something were to happen to Clementina while married, the money automatically passes to her spouse. I felt the air escape my lungs. Orion, I whispered. Exactly, Booker said. If Orion marries Clementina, and something happens to her, he inherits everything. And considering the relationship he has with Serafina, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Do you think they plan to harm Clementina? I asked, feeling horror rise up my throat. I don't have proof of that, Booker said carefully. But I do have proof that Serafina is a very controlling, very ambitious, and very desperate woman. And your son, Ms. Washington, forgive me for saying it this way, your son is completely under her control. I closed my eyes. I thought of my Orion, of the boy who hugged me, of the young man who graduated with honors, of the man I thought I had raised. At what moment had he become this? At what moment had he stopped being my son and become the puppet of an unscrupulous woman? There is one last thing, Booker said, and it is the most important. He took out an audio recording, a small device. I managed to place a microphone in the Midtown apartment. It's illegal, I know, but I thought you needed to hear this. He pressed the play button, and I heard my son's voice. What if Clementina finds out? It was Orion. He sounded nervous. Then Serafina's voice, soft, manipulative, maternal, and seductive at the same time. She won't find out, my love. Clementina is foolish. She only sees what she wants to see. But when we get married, how are we going to continue this? Orion listened to me. Well, a pause, sounds I didn't want to imagine. Then Serafina spoke again with a firm voice. Clementina is not going to be a problem for long. You marry her, wait a year, maybe 2, and then things happen. Accidents happen. Serafina, I can't. You can't. What? You can't be happy. You can't have the future you deserve. Orion, I love you. I love you like Clementina never will. And when all this is over, we will be together, you and I, with all the money we need, without hiding. A silence, and then, my son's voice. so low, I barely heard it. Okay, I'll do what you ask. Booker stopped the recording. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My son, my only son, the boy I raised with my own hands, the boy I taught about kindness, honesty, dignity. He was planning to marry an innocent girl to inherit her fortune, and he was letting a psychopathic woman put the idea in his head that Clementina had to disappear. What are you going to do, Ms. Washington? Booker asked softly. I looked at the photographs scattered on the table. I looked at the documents, the bank statements, the evidence of a conspiracy so twisted it seemed taken from a soap opera. But it was real, and it was my son. I don't know, I whispered. I don't know what I'm going to do. You can go to the police, Booker suggested. With this information, they can stop the wedding. They can investigate Serafina and Orion. What would happen to my son? I asked, tears falling down my cheeks. Booker didn't answer, because we both knew the answer. Orion would go to jail for fraud, for conspiracy, maybe for attempted murder. If they managed to prove his intentions, my son would spend years in prison, and I would be the one who put him there. Think about it, Booker said, and when you decide what to do, call me. I'll be available. He gave me his card, paid for the coffee, and left. I stayed sitting in that coffee shop for hours, with the folder in my hands, feeling everything that had been my life turning into ash. I thought about going to the police. I thought about talking to Clementina, warning her, saving her. I thought about confronting Orion, shouting at him, asking him how he could have become this, but I did none of that because I needed something more than justice. I needed Orion to see, to understand, to feel the weight of what he had done. I needed Serafina to lose everything she had gained with her men, and I needed to do it in a way that no one could say I was the villain because I wasn't going to be the mother who destroyed her son. And then when he was at the bottom, when he had lost everything, maybe, just maybe, he would remember who I was and what he had been before that woman poisoned him. I took the folder, put it in my purse, and left the coffee shop with my back straight and my head held high. The wedding was in 2 weeks, and I had a plan that started with a simple acceptance. I was going to go to that wedding. I was going to sit at that table, and when the exact moment arrived, I was going to make a single phone call, and everything would crumble, because sometimes the best revenge isn't to attack, it's to let the truth do its work. The night of the wedding arrived like a storm everyone expected except me, because I knew that night wasn't going to be a celebration. It was going to be a revelation. I dressed carefully. I chose a simple navy blue dress I had sewn years ago. Nothing ostentatious, nothing that drew attention. I pulled my hair into a discreet bun. I put on my mother's pearl earrings. I wanted to look dignified because I knew this would be the last time Orion would see me as his mother. The ceremony was at the cathedral, as Serafina had planned, a beautiful church full of white flowers and candles. There were more than 200 guests, elegant people, moneyed people, people who looked at me sideways wondering who that simple woman sitting alone in the 5th row was, because they hadn't even given me a seat in the front rows. Clementina's family occupied the entire right side of the church, and on the left side, where the groom's family should be, there were only 3 of us. Me, a distant aunt of Orion's who barely knew him, and a cousin who came more for the free food than for affection. That was all that was left of our family. When Orion walked to the altar, my heart skipped a beat. He looked handsome, elegant, mature, in a dark gray suit I knew he hadn't paid for, with his hair perfectly combed, with a nervous but happy smile. For a moment, just for a moment, I saw the boy he used to be again, and I almost regretted what I was about to do. Almost. But then I saw Sir. She was sitting in the front row in a champagne-colored dress that screamed money, her hair perfectly styled, her jewels shining under the candlelight, and when Orion passed in front of her on his way to the altar, Serafina shot him a look I knew very well, a look of possession, a look that said, "You are mine." And Orion responded with a small, complicit, intimate smile. Just before standing at the altar to wait for his bride, I felt bile rise in my throat. Clementina walked in on her father's arm. She looked beautiful, innocent, radiant. The strapless dress she had chosen, despite my advice, fit her well. I had to admit it. Her face shone with happiness. She knew nothing. That poor girl had no idea she was walking toward her own trap. The ceremony was long. The priest spoke about love, fidelity, commitment. Every word was like a dagger in my chest because I knew it was all a lie. When it came time for the vows, Orion took Clementina's hands and said firmly, "Clementina, I promise to love and respect you every day of my life. I pledge to be your companion, your pillar of support, and your haven. I commit to establishing a trustworthy and truthful future with you. Liar, 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 Clementina yelled so passionately that I had to bite my lip to keep from screaming. Serafina grinned contentedly as the guests sighed. Everyone but me cheered as the priest stated, I now pronounce you husband and wife. I simply observed them. I knew the time had arrived when I saw Orion kissing Clementina, Serafina wiping away a fictitious tear, and Reginald nodding out in his chair. The St. Regis hosted the reception. A 5-course dinner, a live orchestra, linen tablecloths, crystal centerpieces, and a massive ballroom decked out with thousands of white roses. Everything was too good to be true. I was seated at a table in the back, far away from Orion and the head table, with strangers who didn't talk to me during the entire evening. I wasn't there to mingle, yet I was invisible once more. I was waiting for that very moment. I watched over dinner. From her position at the head table, I could see how Serafina was in charge of everything, how she discreetly instructed the servers, how she always glanced at Orion when Clementina wasn't around. I observed Orion's reaction to those glances. It was repulsive. It was blatant. It was ill. The dancing started after dinner. The dance with the parents and the newlyweds waltz. Clementina and Orion danced first. After that, it was his turn to dance with me and the groom's mother. I rose from my chair and made my way to the dancing floor. Everyone was observing me. Orion smiled artificially and held out his hand. Mama, son, I said, grasping his hand. The initial few seconds of the dance were spent in silence. The music was lovely and gentle. Everyone was watching us. He said, You look beautiful, Mama, without making eye contact. Thank you, I answered. You also look fantastic. Another pause. Are you content? Yes, he said quickly when I inquired, very pleased. Really, Orion, are you genuinely content? For the first time all night, he looked me in the eyes and I saw something there. Something small, something that might have been guilt or maybe just discomfort. Yes, Mama, Clementina is amazing. Together, we will be quite content. And, lowering my voice, Serafina, is she also amazing? His body stiffened. After a little pause, he resumed dancing while tightening his grip on my hand. I have no idea what you're discussing. Son, I believe you are aware. This isn't the time. Mama, Orion, when is the time going to come? When, following Clementina's incident, following your inheritance of her wealth, he came to a complete stop, released me, and gave me a stern look. What were you saying? Orion, I know everything. Everything. We were no longer dancing, but the music continued to play. People began whispering and staring at us. He added in a low, menacing voice, You don't know anything. You're making things up. I have pictures. I have records from the hotel. Bank statements are in my possession. I've got recordings. His face turned white. How did that woman treat you? Orion, Mama, how could she have made you into this? You're not understanding. Raising his voice, he exploded. It will never make sense to you. The music ceased. Everybody was looking. With her wedding gown trailing on the ground, Clementina ran over. Orion, what's going on? Zenobia, Miss Suddenly Serafina was there. She moved in between me and Orion. I believe it would be best if you left. Zenobia, are you creating a commotion? A scene? Feeling the anger grow in my chest, I repeated, I'm creating a commotion. Yes, she firmly said. My daughter is getting married, and I won't let your turmoil ruin the occasion. My dramas. I laughed without a sense of humor. Serafina, would you like to discuss dramas? Clementina gave us a perplexed expression. Orion was immobilized. The murmurs of the guests grew louder. Then Serafina performed something that will always stick in my memory. She moved toward me with forceful steps, picked up a bowl of still hot seafood gumbo from the closest table, and tossed it in my face. I could feel the spices, the boiling liquid scorching my skin, the soup trickling down my clothes, the agony, and the humiliation. Everyone let out a yell. Clementina let out a cry. I remained where I was, but someone ran for napkins. I simply stood there staring directly at Serafina while the soup trickled down my cheeks. With a serene, contented smile, she spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. You deserve that. There was total stillness in the room. Then my only son, Orion, who I had raised by myself, crossed his arms and said, She's right, Mama. Those words stabbed me more deeply than a knife. She was crying, Clementina. There was muttering among the guests. Reginald was still dozing off in his chair. So I used what little dignity I still had to wipe my scorching face with a napkin from the closest table. Then, without running, without crying, without giving them the satisfaction of witnessing my destruction, I walked directly toward the ballroom's exit. However, I pulled my phone from my handbag, called the number I had stored, and said just 3 things before I left. It's time. After hanging up, I walked out of the hallway, got into my car, and headed for my apartment via the dimly lit streets. I grinned because the call I had just made wasn't to the police, even though my face was burning and my heart was shattered. They would never forget it since it was to someone else, someone who would make all the difference. I continued to question whether I made the correct decision. In my position, what would you have done? My spirit was much more wrecked than my clothes when I got to my flat. I didn't cry, though. I was crying no more. I removed the dress that was wet in soup and tossed it in the garbage. I didn't want to see that ever again. My skin was still hurting, so I took a long shower and let the hot water cleanse it. I stepped outside and put on my old cotton pajamas, the ones that were my and no one else's, the ones that had holes in the elbows and that I had worn for years. I knew the call I had made would have repercussions. So I brewed coffee in my stoneware mug, the same one I always use, and waited in front of the window. Repercussions that would begin that very evening. It wasn't the police. My boy couldn't be imprisoned by anyone. The person was far more powerful than all of it. The man who had left those millions in trust for his granddaughter was Clementina's grandfather, Cornelius Estrada, who was also her mother's father. He was an 82-year-old widower, a retired businessman, and one of those individuals who created empires on their own and who didn't put up with deceit or treachery. At one of the rare family get-togethers I had been invited to, I had met him months prior. The lunch at Serafina's residence was informal. "You're the boy's mother, right?" Cornelius inquired in a gruff but gentle voice as he sat next to me. I was silent in my corner, invisible as usual. "Yes, sir, I'm Zenobia." He tested my name by asking again, "Zenobia. Pretty name. And what do you do, Zenobia?" "I have a sewing shop. I make dresses, alterations." "Ah, you work with your hands like me. I like that people who work with their hands have soul." We talked through the whole lunch. He told me about his life, how he started selling tools out of a truck and ended up owning a hardware chain across the southeast, how he had worked 14 hours a day for 50 years, how he had been widowed 10 years ago and still missed his wife every morning. "My daughter Serafina doesn't visit me much," he said with sadness. "She says I'm old, that I smell old, that my house is full of junk." "I'm sure she loves you very much," I said, trying to be kind. "No," he replied with brutal honesty. "My daughter loves me for my money, but I don't have money anymore. I left it all to my granddaughter Clementina, because she does visit me, she does hug me, she still has a heart." He gave me his card that day. "If you ever need anything, Zenobia, call me. I like people who work with their hands." I kept that card in my wallet, and 3 weeks after receiving the photographs, I called him. We met at his house, an old craftsman bungalow in Inman Park, full of antique furniture and family photos. He received me with strong coffee and pastries. "Tell me, Zenobia, what is so urgent?" I showed him everything. The photos, the bank statements, the recordings, the documents proving the conspiracy. Cornelius listened in silence. His face changed color, first pale, then red, then purple with rage. When I finished, he stayed quiet for a long time. "My granddaughter is in danger," he said finally, his voice shaking. "Yes, sir." "What about your son? Is your son involved in this scheme?" "Yes, sir." "You tell me, but why? How about you call the police?" I had to be honest, so it took me a time to respond. "Because my son will be put in jail if I call the police. Even if he has deceived me and changed into someone I don't recognize, he is still my son. It cannot be me who locks him up." Cornelius gave a slow nod. "But," he said, "I can be." I said, "I just want Clementina to be safe. And I want my son to see the repercussions of his actions, comprehend what he has done, and feel the weight of his choices. And Serafina, I want her to suffer for what she did, manipulating my son, leading him down this path, and plotting to hurt a helpless girl." Cornelius grasped my hand in his aged, wrinkled, but still sturdy palms. "You are a courageous and sensible woman, Zenobia. I'll be of assistance to you. However, I need you to make me a pledge. Anything, Zenobia, when everything blows up, and, trust me, it will blow up, you will endure hardship. Your son will despise you. People will converse. You will be alone yourself." Calmly, I responded, "I am already alone." "No," he said. "There is yet hope for you. However, that hope will die when this is over. Are you ready for that?" I pondered Orion, the young man he had grown into. Cornelius nodded, and I replied, yes, I am prepared. Then we're going to take this action. You will attend the wedding. You will act normally. And when the time comes for them to reveal who they really are, you will call me, and I will take the necessary action. First, what are you going to do? I am going to get Clementina out of that house that same night. I have lawyers, I have doctors. I am going to prove my daughter is incapable of caring for her own daughter. I am going to get a protection order. And the money, the trust, will be frozen immediately. Neither Clementina nor anyone else will touch that money until a judge decides what to do. And believe me, with the proof we have, the judge will decide in my favor. And Orion, Cornelius looked at me with sadness. Your son won't go to jail because technically he hasn't committed a crime yet. He's just a fool who let himself be manipulated by an unscrupulous woman, but he is going to lose everything. The marriage, the money, the family, the reputation. He is going to be left with nothing. Good, I said firmly. That is exactly what he deserves. And that was how we arrived at this moment. Me sitting in my apartment, drinking coffee, waiting. At 11 p.m., my phone rang. It was Cornelius. It is done. Zenobia, what happened? I arrived at the St. Regis with my lawyers and 2 police cars. I told Clementina I needed to speak with her urgently. When she saw the photographs, when she heard the recordings, she fainted. We had to take her to the hospital. My God, is she okay? Physically, she is fine, but emotionally, that girl is destroyed. I'm so sorry. It's not your fault, Zenobia. It is my daughter's fault, and that boy's fault. What happened with Orion and Serafina? Orion tried to explain, tried to say it was all a lie, but when he saw the proof, he fell silent. He stood there in his groom's suit, surrounded by guests who were whispering and pointing at him without saying anything. And Serafina, that woman, Cornelius's voice filled with contempt. That woman tried to deny everything, said the photos were edited, the recordings were fake, that it was a conspiracy against her. Did they believe her? Of course not. The scandal was monumental. Guests went running, the hotel staff didn't know what to do, and Reginald, that useless man, slept through the whole drama, and now Clementina is under my custody. We are going to annul the marriage. It was the same night. So legally, it's as if it never existed. The trust is frozen. And I filed a complaint against Serafina for fraud, extortion, and conspiracy to commit murder. Is she going to jail? God willing, yes. The lawyers say we have a solid case. Thank you, Cornelius. Thank you for protecting Clementina. No, Zenobia. Thank you for warning me in time. You saved my granddaughter's life. There was a silence. And your son? Cornelius asked. Do you want to know about him? I closed my eyes, breathed deep. Tell me. He left the hotel at 2 a.m. alone, without anyone. The guests looked at him with scorn. No one defended him. No one helped him. He left in his car, and I don't know where he went. I understand, Zenobia. Your son lost everything tonight. How do you feel? How did I feel? Empty, sad, relieved, guilty, avenged, all at the same time. I feel at peace, I said finally, because I did the right thing. Yes, Cornelius replied. You did the right thing. Not many mothers have that strength. We hung up. I sat in front of the window with my empty stone, or a mug in my hands. Outside, the city was still alive. Lights, noise, people living their lives. And I was here alone, but with a clear conscience because it hadn't been revenge. What I sought was justice. Justice for Clementina, who didn't deserve to be used. Justice for me, who didn't deserve to be humiliated. And justice for Orion, who needed to understand that actions have consequences. I hadn't put him in jail, but I had left him with nothing, without money, without family, without reputation. And maybe, just maybe, when he hit rock bottom, when he lost everything, when he was completely alone, he would remember who I was, and what he had been before Serafina's poison corrupted him. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months, without nightmares, without anguish, without that knot in my stomach that had accompanied me since I received those first photographs, because I had done what I had to do, not with rage, not with a thirst for vengeance, but with the cold clarity of one who understands that sometimes the greatest love you can give someone is to let them face the consequences of their own decisions, even if that means watching them fall, even if that means losing them forever. The days after the wedding were strange, silent, as if the world had stopped. I heard nothing from Orion for a week. He didn't call, he didn't write, he didn't come looking for me. And I didn't look for him either because I knew he needed time to understand what had happened, to process the magnitude of what he had lost. And I needed time to heal. Cornelius called me every 2 days to tell me how things were going. Clementine was in intensive therapy, not psychiatric, but emotional. She had fallen into a deep depression after discovering the man she had married was having an affair with her own mother. It's too big a betrayal, Cornelius told me. Too twisted. My granddaughter doesn't understand how it could happen, and neither do I. How is she? Fragile. Very fragile. But she is 18. She is young. She will heal. With time, she will heal. The scandal spread like gunpowder through the whole city. Social media exploded. Someone had recorded part of the confrontation at the St. Regis and uploaded it to the internet. The video went viral in hours. Orion leaving the hotel alone, his suit rumpled, his face undone. Serafina screaming at Cornelius's lawyers, Clementina being taken out on a stretcher. People commented, speculated, invented theories. Some said Orion was a victim, that Serafina had seduced and manipulated him. Others said he was an opportunity. The truth, as always, was somewhere in the middle. Orion wasn't completely innocent, but he wasn't completely guilty either. He was a weak man who had made terrible decisions because he didn't have the courage to say no. By the second week, Cornelius gave me more news. The DA accepted the complaint against Serafina. They are going to investigate her formally for fraud and conspiracy. How likely is it she goes to jail? With the proof we have, very likely, the recordings are enough. The lawyers say she could face between 8 and 15 years. 15 years, Serafina, the woman who had humiliated me, who had manipulated my son, who had planned to harm her own daughter, to keep her money, was going to pay. And Reginald, I asked, that poor man knew nothing. He's a drunk who has been disconnected from his family for years. The investigators confirmed he had nothing to do with the plan, but now he is alone. His wife is on her way to jail. His daughter hates him, and his business is bankrupt. Is he going to lose the house? Already lost it. The bank foreclosed last week. Now he is living in a rented room in Dakar on a miserable pension. I didn't feel pity for him because Reginald had eyes. He had ears. He had been there in that house for years, watching his wife destroy lives, and he had done nothing. Sometimes complicity is as guilty as the action. In the third week, Orion finally sought me out. He arrived at my apartment at 8 at night without warning. He knocked on the door with soft blows. When I opened it, I almost didn't recognize him. He had a beard of several days, deep circles under his eyes, wrinkled clothes, unkempt hair. He had lost weight. He looked destroyed. "Mama," he said with a broken voice. I stood in the doorway without moving. "What do you want, Orion? I need to talk to you. We have nothing to talk about. Please, Mama, just let me in." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to slam the door in his face, to tell him to leave, that he was no longer my son. But another part, that part that had carried that boy in my arms, that had sung him lullabies, that had cleaned his scraped knees, that part couldn't say no. I let him in. He sat on the chair in the shop, the same chair where I had received the first photographs, where everything had started to break. "Do you want coffee?" I asked out of pure habit. "No thanks." I sat across from him, waited. Orion took a long time to speak. When he finally did, his voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry, Mama." "What are you sorry for?" "Everything. Everything I did. Everything I did to you. And Clementine." "Are you sorry for her, too?" He nodded, tears falling down his cheeks. "Yes, especially for her. I didn't want to hurt her. I never wanted to, but you did." I interrupted with a cold voice. "You planned to marry her, to steal her inheritance." "I heard the recording, Orion. I know what you said. It wasn't me talking. It was Serafina." "Are you going to blame Serafina for your decisions?" "She manipulated me, Mama. She made me believe that I was worth nothing without her, that you had raised me to be mediocre, that I deserved more." Every word was like a dagger. "And you believed her?" "Yes," he whispered. "I believed her." "Why, Orion? Why did you believe her and not me?" "Because she gave me what you never could. Money, right?" "Well, yes. But not only that. She gave me attention. She made me feel important. She made me feel like I was special." "I made you feel special, too." "No, Mama. You made me feel guilty." I stared at him. "Every time I came to visit you, I saw your small apartment, your old clothes, your tired hands, and I felt guilty for having more than you." "Serafina never made me feel guilty. Serafina told me I deserved everything I had." I stayed silent. processing his words, and I understood something terrible. My son hadn't left me out of malice. He had left me because he couldn't stand remembering where he came from, because I was the mirror of his poverty, of his humble origins, of everything he wanted to forget. And Serafina had offered him an exit, a way to become someone new, someone important. Someone who didn't have a seamstress mother reminding him of his roots. You know, what is the saddest thing about all this, Orion? I said finally, that I never made you feel guilty. You just felt guilty because you knew deep down that you had abandoned me. I know, I'm a bear. I know, Mama, and I am so sorry. Where have you been these weeks? Cheap hotels, spending the little I had left. I lost my job. No one wants to hire me. My name is all over social media. I'm alive. And the house Reginald was going to give you never existed. It was all a lie. The hardware stores are bankrupt. The house in Buckhead is foreclosed. There was no money, only debt. And Serafina is in jail awaiting trial. Her lawyers say she's going to be sentenced to 10 to 15 years. Good, I said without remorse. Orion looked at me with red eyes. Don't you feel anything for her? Should I? That woman destroyed her own daughter. She corrupted you. She humiliated me. She planned a murder. Why should I feel anything for her? Because I loved her. Those words pierced me. No, Orion, you didn't love Sarah. You were obsessed with what she represented. Power, money, status. But that is not love. Maybe you're right. We sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Orion asked what he had come to ask. Can I stay here, Mama? Just for a few days? Until I find a job? Until I can? No, I said firmly. Mama, please. I have nowhere to go. I have no money. You should have thought about that before. Mama, I'm your son. Yes, I interrupted. You are my son, and that is why I tell you no. Because if I let you stay here, if I rescue you now, you are never going to learn. You are never going to understand the weight of your decisions. Then what do you want me to do? Sleep on the street? I want you to do what I did when your father abandoned us. I want you to get up, work, rebuild your life with your own hands, without shortcuts, without manipulations, without depending on anyone other than yourself. I can't, Mama. I'm not as strong as you. Then learn to be. Orion stood up from the chair. He looked at me with a mix of pain, rage, and desperation. Someday you're going to forgive me, Mama. Someday you're going to maybe, I interrupted. But that day is not today, nor tomorrow, nor next month. Maybe in years, or maybe never. That depends on you, on who you decide to be from now on. And if you change and if you become someone better, then maybe, just maybe, we can talk again. But not as mother and son, but as two people who once knew each other and need to learn to know each other again. Orion nodded, crying. He walked to the door, opened it, and before leaving, turned one last time. I love you, Mama. I know, I replied, but love without respect means nothing. He left. I closed the door and stood there, listening to his footsteps fade down the hallway. I didn't cry because there was nothing to cry about. I had done the right thing, the hardest thing, the most painful thing, but the right thing. That night, while I drank coffee in my stoneware mug and looked out the window, I thought about everything that had happened, about how Serafina, that woman who believed herself so powerful, so smart, so superior, had ended up alone in a cell, about how Reginald, who had hidden behind alcohol for years, had lost everything he once had, about how Orion, who had sought wealth and status at any cost, had ended up with nothing, no money, no family, no dignity, and about how I, the humble woman, the seamstress, the mother no one respected, was still here with my small apartment, with my shop, with my tired hands, with my stoneware mug, but with something they never had, peace, because life always collects its debts, not with violence, not with vengeance, but with time, with patience, with the silent justice that arrives when you least expect it. Serafina had called me crazy once. Years later, I knew she was alone in that cell, looking at blank walls, without visitors, without love, without anything. And I wondered if in that moment, in that terrible void, she finally understood what she had lost. Not the money, not the status, but her humanity, her soul, everything that makes a life worth living. And Orion, my poor Orion, maybe someday he would understand that true wealth is not in what you have. It is in who you are, in how you treat people, in the dignity with which you face your mistakes. But that day hadn't arrived yet, and I couldn't wait for it because my life, my precious life, kept moving forward with or without him. 2 years have passed since that night. 2 years since I saw my son leave my apartment without a dime in his pocket and without a place to go. 2 years since I decided that the greatest love I could give him was to let him face the consequences of his own decisions. And in these 2 years, I have learned things I never thought I would have to learn. I have learned that silence can be more powerful than 1,000 words, that dignity is not negotiated, that forgiveness does not mean forgetting, and that sometimes letting go of someone you love is the bravest act you can do. My life has changed, not in spectacular ways. I didn't become rich. I didn't move to a big house. I didn't stop sewing. But it changed where it matters, in the deep, in the soul. I still live in my apartment in the West End. I still work in my shop. I still brew my coffee every morning in the same stoneware mug I've used for years, but I no longer feel invisible. I no longer feel small. I no longer allow anyone to make me feel less than I am, because I understood something fundamental. A person's worth is not in how much money they have or in what. A person's worth is in their capacity to remain standing when everything crumbles, in their capacity to choose the right thing even if it hurts, in their capacity to forgive themselves for not having been perfect. Cornelius became a very dear friend. He comes to visit me every 2 weeks. He always brings pastries from his favorite bakery and coffee. He prepares himself in his old house in Inman Park. We sit in the shop among scraps of fabric and spools of thread and talk about life, about what it has been like raising children in difficult times, about how it hurts to see the people we love take wrong paths, about how old age teaches you that in the end, the only thing that matters is being able to look in the mirror and recognize the person you see. Clementina asked about you last week. He told me on his last visit. Yes, I asked, surprised. How is she? Better, much better. She finished therapy last month. Started studying psychology. Says she wants to help other women who have gone through what she went through. I'm so glad to hear that. She wants to meet you. Zenobia says she wants to thank you for saving her. I felt a knot in my throat. I didn't save her. I just did what I had to do. That is exactly what saving someone means. Cornelius replied with a sad smile. Doing the right thing, even if it costs you everything. Clementina came to visit me one October afternoon. She arrived alone without warning, knocking timidly on the shop door. When I opened it, I almost didn't recognize her. She was no longer the fragile, scared girl I had seen at the wedding. Now there was something different in her, something stronger, more mature. Miss Zenobia, she said softly, can I come in? Of course, child, come in. She sat on the shop chair, the same one where Orion had sat 2 years ago. I made her coffee. We talked about unimportant things for a few minutes, the weather, her studies, how she liked living with her grandfather, until she finally gathered the courage to say what she had come to say. I want to thank you for everything you did. You don't have to thank me for anything, Clementine. Yes, I do, she insisted with tears in her eyes. You saved my life. Literally, if you hadn't called my grandfather, if you hadn't done something, I did it because it was right, because you are a good girl who didn't deserve what they were doing to you. My mother, her voice broke. My own mother planned. I know, child, I know. Clementina cried for a long time. I sat beside her and stroked her hair, as I would have done with a daughter, because in a way, in that moment, she needed a mother, a real mother, not the one she had had, but the one she deserved to have. How did you get over it? She asked me when she calmed down. How did you manage to keep going after everything that happened with Orion? I breathed deep. It wasn't easy. There were nights I wanted to call him, rescue him, tell him everything was fine and he could come home. But I knew if I did, he would never learn. He would never change. And has he changed? I don't know. I admit it. 6 months ago, he wrote me a letter. He told me he got a job in a factory, that he's living in a small room in Norcross, that he's going to therapy, that he's trying to be better. Did you reply? No, not yet. Why? Because I need to be sure he is changing for him, not for me. I need to know he is doing the internal work he has to do, and that takes time. Clementina nodded thoughtfully. I'm doing that work too. In therapy, I learned I can't blame myself for what my mom did, that it wasn't my responsibility to detect something was wrong, that I was just a girl who trusted the wrong people. Exactly, I said, taking her hand. And now, you are a woman who is learning to trust again, but in the right people, starting with yourself. Clementina stayed all afternoon. She helped me sew the hem of a wedding dress. She told me about her plans to someday open a support center for women victims of abuse, and when she left, she hugged me tight and whispered in my ear, "Thank you for being the mother my own mother never was." That night I cried, not from sadness, but but from something more complex. Because I had lost a son, but in a way I had gained a daughter, not by blood, but by heart. 3 months ago, I received news of Cornelius called me one morning with a grave voice. Zenobia, I need to tell you something about Seraphine. What happened? She was sentenced 12 years in prison, without possibility of early release. How is she destroyed? Physically, she is deteriorated a lot. No one visits her, not even Reginald. She's completely alone. And how do you feel about that? Relieved, but also sad because that woman is my daughter. And despite everything she did, a part of me remembers the girl she once was, before ambition corrupted her. I understood what Cornelius felt because I also remembered the boy Orion had been before the world changed him, before bad decisions defined him. And I wondered if one day he could go back to being that boy, or if that boy had died forever. Orion's letter arrived 2 weeks ago. It was longer than the first, more honest, more vulnerable. He told me he had started attending a support group for people who had made serious mistakes, that he was learning to live with the guilt without letting it destroy him, that he was saving every dollar to someday be able to pay me back all the money he had borrowed and never paid. I don't expect you to forgive me, Mama, he wrote. I don't expect us to go back to what we were. I only hope that someday when you see me on the street, you don't cross to the other side to avoid me. I only hope you know that every day I wake up trying to be a better man than I was yesterday. And every day I think of you, of how I treated you, of how I failed you, of how I let a woman convince me that you were the problem when you were the only person who really loved me. Sometimes I pass in front of your building. I don't knock. I don't come up. I just stand there on the sidewalk looking at your window wondering what you might be doing, if you're sewing, if you're drinking coffee, if you ever think of me, and then I leave because I know I have no right to bother you. I have no right to ask you for anything else. But I want you to know something, Mama, something I never told you enough when I should have. Thank you. Thank you for raising me alone. Thank you for sacrificing so much. Thank you for giving me opportunities you never had. And thank you for having the courage to let me fall when I needed it most. Because now I understand that you didn't let me fall out of hate. You let me fall out of love. And that was the greatest gift you could give me. I love you, Mama. I have always loved you, even if my actions said otherwise. Your son, Orion. I read that letter 5 times. I cried through every reading, and then I put it in the drawer, where I keep important things, next to the first photo of Orion when he was a baby, next to his graduation diploma, next to a note he wrote me when he was 8 years old that said, Mama, you are my hero. I haven't replied to him yet, but I think I will soon because I have learned that forgiveness is not forgetting what happened. Forgiveness is remembering what happened, feeling the pain, and still choosing to move forward without carrying that weight in your heart. It doesn't mean I'm going to forget. It doesn't mean things are going to go back to how they were before. But it means I am ready to build something new, something different. A relationship based not on what we were, but on what we can be. Last night, I had a dream. I dreamed I was sitting in my shop sewing when they knocked on the door. I opened it, and it was Orion, but not the Orion of now, nor the Orion who betrayed me. It was the boy, my boy with his big eyes and his innocent smile. Mama, he told me, I lost my way, but I think I found it again. And I hugged him and cried and said, Welcome home, my son. When I woke up, I had tears on my cheeks, and I knew that dream was a sign, not that everything was resolved, but that I was ready to start healing, to start forgiving, not just Orion, but myself, for not having been the perfect mother, for not having protected him from everything, for not having seen the signs sooner. Because the truth is that none of us is perfect. We all make mistakes. We all hurt people we love. We all get lost at some point. But what defines us is not the mistakes we make. It is what we do after. If we learn, if we grow, if we get up, or if we stay there on the ground blaming others for our fall. This morning, while I prepared my coffee in my stoneware mug, I looked out the window and saw the streets of Atlanta filling with people. People in a hurry, people with problems, people with dreams, people with pain, and I understood that we are all part of the same story, a story of mistakes and redemptions, of falls and risings, of losses and findings. And my story, this story I have told you, is just one more among millions. But it is mine, and I am proud of it, because I survived, because I didn't break, because I maintained my dignity when everything around me crumbled, and because I learned that true strength is not in never falling, it is in getting up every time you fall. Now I am 61 years old, 2 years older than when this story began, and I feel I have lived an entire lifetime in these 2 years. I keep sewing wedding dresses for girls who dream of eternal love. And every time I sew, I think of Clementina in her strapless dress, in how that day she thought she was starting the best stage of her life, and I pray that someday when she is ready, she finds a real love, a love that sees her, that respects her, that values her, not for her money, not for her last name, but for who she is. And I pray for Orion because and a mother never stops praying for her children, even if they have hurt her, even if they have betrayed her, even if they have made her cry until she ran out of tears. A mother's love has no limits, but now I know it shouldn't have conditions that allow abuse either. Love must be firm, honest, brave. Love must tell the truth, even if it hurts. It must set limits, even if it costs. It must let go, even if it wants to hold on, because only then, with that difficult and brave love, can we help the people we love to become the best they can be. If my story helps a single woman open her eyes, if it helps a single mother understand that loving doesn't mean permitting, if it helps a single person choose dignity over comfort, then it will all have been worth it. Every tear, every pain, every sleepless night, every difficult decision, everything. Because this story isn't just mine. It belongs to all the women who have been humiliated and have chosen to stand up, to all the mothers who have had to let go of their children to save them, to all the people who have faced betrayals and chosen forgiveness without forgetting. This story is for you who are listening to me, for you who maybe are going through something similar, for you who don't know if you're going to be able to survive the pain you feel today. I want you to know something. Yes, you can. You are going to be able to, because you are stronger than you think, because you have more courage than you imagine, and because pain, however terrible it may be, doesn't last forever. Time cures everything. It doesn't erase it, but it cures it. And one day, maybe months or years later, you are going to wake up and you are going to realize that breathing doesn't hurt as much anymore, that thinking about what happened doesn't destroy you anymore, that you can remember without bleeding. And that day you are going to understand that you survived, that you won, not because you destroyed the one who hurt you, but because you didn't let them destroy you. I closed this story with the same stoneware mug in my hands, the one that has accompanied me for years, the one that knows the taste of my coffee on difficult mornings, the one that has held tears and hopes, the one that has never failed me, because in the end, the simplest things are the ones that remain, the humblest are the strongest, and the most ignored are the most valuable. Like me, like you, like all the women who have been underestimated and have proven they are made of steel. Thank you for listening until the end. Thank you for allowing me to share my story with you. And remember, life always collects its debts, not with vengeance, but with truth, with time, with silent justice. And in the end, always, always good triumphs. Maybe not in the way we expected, maybe not when we expected, but it triumphs because the universe has a memory, and no one escapes the consequences of their own actions. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next